Greetings and welcome to another Futurism Film Friday. Today's film is 2001: A Space Odyssey, and this is a film made in 1968. This film is widely considered to be one of the greatest films of all time, not merely one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, if not the greatest science fiction film of all time, but one of the greatest films of any genre that has ever been made. And this is very lofty praise, but it's very justified because this is a film that was so far ahead of its time and broke barriers in so many different ways, from special effects to concepts to the musical score of a film to just so many things on so many different levels. This is a film that explores everything from the evolution of human intelligence and how that may have been influenced from the outside by a superior extraterrestrial intelligence, to human space travel and the regular participation of humans in space travel, to the emergence of sentient artificial intelligence. All those themes are captured in one film and woven together very seamlessly, and this was a film made all the way back in 1968. If you're young and you're not familiar with this film, you should see it, and if you can see it in the theater on a big screen, do so. It is occasionally screened in big movie theaters from time to time, and a loyal audience always goes to watch it, and if you've never done so, I recommend that you do it. The special effects still hold up to this day, even though they were made in 1968. So this is a film that probes almost all of the very deep questions in a single film. Now, on the test of futurism, however, it isn't really that accurate. And this is to be expected. Remember, the 1960s in the United States was a space race, and a huge amount of government money was going into space exploration and a rush to put humans on the moon. And as I've discussed in other videos, the Apollo program was extraordinarily expensive. It consumed 1% of US GDP for at least the first 8 years, 1961 to 1969, before putting a person on the moon. And it employed 400,000 people, which is a huge number of people, analogous to employing about 700,000 people today. That is how many people were working on the Apollo project at its highest point, and this is for a multi-year period, almost the entire decade of the 1960s. Therefore, there was a space bubble in terms of Hollywood content and even the science fiction genre in general. And films such as 2001: A Space Odyssey and other space travel related films were coming out in great numbers at that time, and that's why this film in 1968 was a byproduct of that cultural phenomenon. Now, from 1968, 2001 seemed like a pretty distant future, to be fair. But here we are in 2021, so actually 20 years after the distant future that this movie envisioned, and we do not have a significant number of humans in space, certainly no space stations or bases, nor do we have any artificial intelligence that becomes sentient and actually acts of its own devices, its own volition. So by that regard, this film greatly overshot the rate of progress and overestimated how much progress there would be both in human space exploration as well as in artificial intelligence by the year 2001. In 2021, neither of the two technological breakthroughs depicted in this film seem all that close at all. Now, this is an important point because while the exploration of the evolution of human intelligence is something that I have done videos on in this channel, and including a video in this tile over here, which is depicted in the early part of this film very well, it is important to recognize that human exploration of space was always going to be something that is not resonant with the first principles of technology. Sure, it makes great science fiction, and it perhaps feeds the human soul, but to send humans in space for space exploration is thousands or millions of times more expensive than sending artificial intelligence into space. And the number of people in space at any given time, even now in 2021, is usually 4 to 6 people at any given time. And I have a link in the description box below that even enables you to check how many people are in space at any given moment, but that number is usually 4 to 6, maybe at the most 7 people in space at any given time. And this is in 2021. As I've described elsewhere, artificial intelligence does not require air or water and can withstand a much greater range of temperature, pressure, gravity, and radiation than a fragile human. And furthermore, artificial intelligence can be sent one way and can be upgraded wirelessly even while it's traveling. So it's just far more cost effective for scientific exploration than having humans in space. Now, creating another habitat for humans, yes, that could happen in the more distant future. That is much further down the line. And again, that is not necessarily resonant with the first principles of technology. That will have to require the participation of an artificial superintelligence, perhaps. So space exploration via artificial intelligence while not consistent with all the science fiction we have seen produced over the last several decades, is probably what is most resonant with the first principles of technology, as well as the engineering and financial constraints of such. But this film nonetheless should be watched. And there was even a sequel film to this set 9 years later in 2010. And that was a decent film. It was never going to reach the heights of the original 2001 A Space Odyssey. But it provides considerable continuity to some of the open questions of the story portrayed in 2001. And there are even novels that are further additions to this series of films and to this science fiction franchise. So it's 2001 A Space Odyssey. It still really stands the test of time, and it is not a movie that can be remade. Thankfully, they put the year that the future is set in the title of the film, and therefore to remake it would be that much harder because it just can't have the same title. But here we are. And if you recall, in my series of Futurism Film Fridays, I also did a feature on another film also made in 1968, which was The Planet of the Apes, and you'll see the link to that in the tile above over here. So two of the greatest science fiction films of all time were made in the same year, and that year was quite some time ago, 1968. Now, I'm not saying Planet of the Apes is as good as 2001 A Space Odyssey, but Planet of the Apes also ranks very high on the list, even if it's not number one, which 2001 A Space Odyssey might very well be. Think of the vision that existed at that time and how futurism-oriented the entertainment industry and pop culture was at that time, and they had a lot fewer tools to go on. There was obviously no internet, but there was not even really data from which to make projections of exponential technologies, and most of the world lived in extreme poverty in 1968. Other than the United States and a few other Western countries, most of the world would have been considered extremely poor by today's standards. It's really profound that there was this much of an episode of futurism foresight in 1968 in Hollywood, and that was inspired by the space program and other space-related activities that were going on at the time. And a significant portion of all children in the 1960s wanted to grow up to be astronauts or otherwise work in space. The future did turn out somewhat differently, and the real space age is in fact in front of us right now in the 2020s, and I have other videos about that, but it's taking a very different form than what was envisioned in 1968, because humans living in space and spending a lot of time in space is ultimately not going to be part of even the new space age in at least the 2020s in the near future. The very distant future might be a different matter, but the space age is going in a relatively different direction. So with that, I urge you to all check out this film, 2001 A Space Odyssey. If you've never seen it before, you should, and if you haven't seen it in a while, you should see it again. That's our Futurism Film Friday. If you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.